This video is a little bit different from my other videos because I'm doing this online. This is an exercise that I found where white while you have to maneuver your knight or just do something in order to actually win this game. It's white to move. So if we start taking a look at what the position looks like, we can see that this is completely drawn, if it hadn't been for the knight, of course. Black has one move that he can make, and that is to push the g5, or well, the pawn on g6 to g5, but that's about the only move that can be played. White cannot move anything. Well, okay, if the black king ever goes to just anywhere, he can push his pawn, but then would just drop a pawn for nothing. But even that would probably be a draw. But obviously, you don't want to lose your pawn for nothing. And also, black doesn't want to play g5 because that would just be a disaster. So obviously, what would happen here if it hadn't been for the knight is that both kings would just go back and forth and agree on a draw eventually. But in this position, white has a knight against a bunch of pawns. I don't know how many pawns. So let's see, 4, 5, 6 against 7 pawns. Okay. So black is up a pawn, but it doesn't really matter. He has double pawns on the c file, and he can move those pawns anyway. Enough about that. So that's what the position looks like. So it's white to move, and the first thing you have to look at is it doesn't make much, if any, sense to move the king, because the king can't do anything anyway. I mean, there's no way in, as you can see. So it's obviously a knight move, but the question is where to put the knight. So where can the knight actually move? Well, he can go to e1 and e3. So let's start with e3. I won't actually move because this is a generator, basically. It's an engine that, so the minute I make a move, it will obviously make a move. So I will just talk about the moves until I actually make what I think is right. So knight to e3 would just lead to something like pawn takes, king takes. And the idea might be something like when the black king moves, because the black king obviously has to move, the idea is to push something like d4. But it doesn't actually lead anywhere, because black can simply move the king somewhere. Let's say knight to e3, pawn takes, king takes, and the king moves to, let's say, d7 and then d4. Let's see, d4. Well, it's not actually a problem either, because I don't think black actually has to do anything except for going back with the king to, say, e6. And if white takes the pawn on the c5, black doesn't even have to take back, and he can just go move back and forth. And again, there's no way for the white king to ever enter because of the f5 pawn as well as the c6 pawn. So even though these pawns on the c file are double, they still close the door, so to speak, for the white king. So knight to e3 doesn't work. So then how about knight to e1? So let's start with knight to e1. Okay, so the black king moved because that's the only move he has. Okay, so it doesn't make that much sense to move the knight to, let's say, c2 in order to take any of these two pawns, because black will simply take back and there's no way in. And also there's no way in here. I mean, attacking either the h5 pawn or the f5 pawn also doesn't make any sense, and there's no way to actually attack this pawn on g6. So it turns out that probably the only move is knight to f3. So the black king just goes anywhere in order to, well, waste moves, basically. And again, since there's no way in except through g5, so let's put the knight there. Well, the knight can't actually do all that much right now. He cannot go to, well, knight to h7 probably doesn't make that much difference. He can just move his king back and forth, and if the knight would ever attack this pawn on c6, let's say, the king is pretty close enough. and taking this pawn is not even possible. I mean, I don't think it leads to anything. So let's say something like king f3. So what's the idea here? Well, the idea is obviously to go sacrifice the knight on e4, because when black takes, and he's pretty much forced to take actually, because if he doesn't take, then this pawn will drop on c5. And then the white knight can just maneuver his way all the way to c2 and then take out of these two pawns. So I think black is more or less forced to take. So f takes e4, and now king takes e4. And here is a little bit of a problem, because it looks like the white king cannot move because the black king is on e6, so he has to triangulate a little bit. If you don't know what triangulation is, then we can just check it out somewhere. Okay, so now it's white to move, and the black king is already on e6. So you simply go back, and now you push the pawn. G takes f5, and now king takes f5. So you can probably see that it's completely winning for black, but it's not actually. Now the win I'm going to choose might not be the simplest or the fastest win, but I will do this anyway. So I will start with going over here, and I'll take this pawn. Okay, so the black king tries to shoulder the white king on the side of the board, but you simply push the pawn, and the black king is obviously forced to take, because otherwise you just make a queen. So now all you have to do is escort your pawn all the way up the board, and you make a queen. Okay, so what about this? It looks like it's not actually very easy for white to win this game anyway, because black has a bunch of pawns and he's actually threatening to start moving those pawns. So let's give a check on here, for example, and then you start moving the king, because obviously we have to work with the king, otherwise it's completely impossible to make any progress. And here you give a check, another check, and then you put the queen on b1. The black king cannot do anything except for just going back and forth, and also he cannot play something like at this point, but he will eventually play c4, because then the d4 pawn will drop off. So let's say queen b2. Okay, so now what? Giving a check doesn't make much sense, I suppose, because well, he can just go to a3, I suppose. So how about the move? How about this? Okay, so he gives a check, and now we take this pawn, and now there will probably a second check. Okay, this is interesting. Black actually has a rather serious threat here. Probably the best is to go with the king over here. Okay, so here you probably go down there, and now he's probably going to play c4, I suppose. Okay, he didn't do that. So all these moves are forced. Giving a check doesn't help, obviously, so let's say... Okay, and now all the pawns will just drop off. So if you don't know how to checkmate the black king here, it's very simple. You simply make the square smaller and smaller the whole time for the black king. And then when the square is smaller, as small as it gets, you start moving the white king. And also make sure you don't stalemate the black king. Okay, one move, and now checkmate. I cannot review this game, so you have to, since this is online, so you have to do that yourself. I hope you enjoyed this, and if you're new to this kind of endgames, I hope you enjoyed it and learned something.